Welcome to Spectral Shadows, where the darkness whispers and the unseen lurks. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because horror feels different at night, especially when you're alone. Those who love their mother, like, share, and comment. Subscribe, if you dare. Now turn off the lights, and let's begin. Story number 1. Would you rather kill someone with a spoon or a butter knife? That was only one in the series of weird questions. It felt as though Dr. McDonough was assessing not my answers, but my reaction to the questions. I didn't like his smile. It was too wide, too rehearsed. Like he'd done this so many times it had become a reflex. But behind the membrane of that pearly grin was something entirely different, something unidentifiable, a personality that in my experience was hidden for a reason. I didn't really care. I was there because of the job offer and nothing else. Exactly how are these questions relevant to my position in the experiment? I asked. They're just here to help us get to know each other. The doc beamed again. He must have noticed my bemuse because he added, "Right. So, I assume you want to know more about the job itself." I nodded. The company has built a small test town in an undisclosed location in Oregon. They named it Ashfield. Sounds welcoming. With your expertise, you'd be head of security. Your job would be to police the town, to make sure everything goes according to plan. That means patrolling, doing head count, detaining people if they prove troublesome, stopping them from leaving without proper dismissal documents, that kind of thing. I don't have the required expertise for that. I'm not a cop. You don't have to be. Think of it as a prestigious security gig. Ah, of course. Companies sure love to rename their job positions into something they thought sounded cool in order to compensate for a lack of pay and an overabundance of responsibilities. Except this company didn't regurgitate the typical, "we're all family here" bullshit. This was the real deal. Even if I wasn't drowning in debt and blacklisted by most security companies, I'd consider the offer. "How long's the experiment gonna be?" I asked. 100 days from the moment of arrival to Ashfield. "What's the purpose of this whole thing?" "That information will not be available to you or the test subjects. Throughout the experiment, you'll be strictly on a need-to-know basis. When you're inside Ashfield, there are no questions. When you're given an order, you execute it without question. I know it sounds harsh, but we can't risk any information getting leaked." "Right." I understood clandestine experiments harbored a lack of transparency to safeguard crucial information, but something about this whole thing bothered me. Perhaps it was the way it felt, rush. Perhaps it was that fucking smile. I need to think it over, if it's all the same to you. "How soon can you let us know?" The doctor's voice was taut, like he was on the verge of obtaining something out of reach. "I don't know, a few days." "Okay, just one thing. I'm not supposed to say this, but we have candidates lined up to fill your position. Ex-military, Secret Service. It's a fierce competition. Someone like you can't compete." That's what that sentence said if you stripped it of its coating. But more than that, it betrayed the urgency in his voice. They needed someone for this position bad. My guess was he was bluffing. "So why not just go with them?" I asked. "Because we did some digging into your past, and we believe, from a psychological standpoint, you'd be the perfect fit for this position. You're assertive, but you also have empathy. When people are cooped up in a small place for 100 days with no outside contact whatsoever, they don't need a brute to keep reminding them what they signed up for. They need someone strong but human they can look up to. Chris, they need someone they can trust. His usage of my first name, felt like a violation, like a cheap attempt to make the communication less formal. But I also know flattery is pointless with you. That's why the company is willing to throw in a little bonus. McDonough pulled out a drawer and tossed a paper in front of me. I glanced at the staggering numbers. Christ. It's not a matter of whether someone is for sale, but what their price tag says, and mine was well below the 5 digits indicated in the document. Finish the experiment, and you won't have to work for a long time. The doctor flashed his PR smile. My transport was arranged by the company. 3 separate flights, a bus and a van ride later, I was in Ashfield. Dr. McDonough had said the company had built the town just recently, so I had expected dirt roads, prop houses, and mannequins on porches mimicking the population. It seemed that I vastly underestimated the company's resources, because this place felt as real as any other town in America. The only thing that gave away its artificial existence was the tall walls surrounding the town, but even that was easy to overlook, thanks to the tree-riddled hills stretching in every direction. I could see people bringing boxes into homes, or writing something down on notepads, or explaining things to who I assume were test subjects. The van driver took me to the security station and told me to talk to whoever was inside. Whatever camaraderie we might have shared during the 4-hour-long drive here was gone the moment I stepped outside, and the tires peeled off the road. Inside the building, I was greeted by a guy in a security uniform. He looked up from the paperwork he was handling. "Chris Chambers?" "Yeah, Travis Baker. Welcome to your new home, sir." He had the no-bullshit face of a Rottweiler. Those kinds of guys were the best to work with in security during high stakes. During the boring hours, not so much. Then again, I was one of those guys. No life outside the job. "Looks like we're gonna have our hands full for a while. Any idea what we're supposed to do?" I asked. "There's some paperwork to read in the security office. It'll tell you everything you need to know." Baker's radio crackled with a voice that told him he was needed somewhere. So he excused himself right after saying he looked forward to working with me. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and headed to the security office. I sat at the desk and looked up at the monitors displaying live cams from all over Ashfield. People milled here and there, settling into their new homes. An occasional car drove down the street. Although everyone was dressed in civilian outfits, the authoritative body language contrasting the timid, confused nods and shrugs made it easy to tell which ones were the company personnel and which the test subjects. I began reading the stack of papers in front of me. "Welcome to Ashfield, population 46. There was a lot of lengthy talk about the company, how they decided to build it, why here, how long it took, that kind of thing. I skipped to the page that said, "Security rules, top priority. 1. Curfew is at 10 p.m. Anyone who is out after that time is to be escorted home. You may fine or detain repeated offenders at your own discretion. 2. Head count of all test subjects must be conducted every morning at 7 a.m. and evening at 7 p.m. 3. All test subjects must be present for clinical trials at Ashfield's medical facility. Address on page 23. No exception. Those who do not show up for the trials are in breach of their contract and must be detained immediately. 4. Report any strange occurrences by calling the number on the landline." Strange occurrences. That was broad. Everything in a town like Ashfield was strange. I figured I'd have to clarify that one later with the ones in charge. 5. Remember their faces. I frowned. Whose faces? The test subjects. And if so, why? Whatever. I reminded myself I didn't understand what the purpose of the experiment was, and I was getting paid too much to start asking questions. 6. The test subjects have signed an agreement to stay at Ashfield for 100 days. Since they will be undergoing medication we do not fully understand yet, Exposure to the outside world is prohibited. Bear in mind that some test subjects are company moles, and their job is to test the security personnel. They may try to make compelling excuses for you to let them go. You will not know whether the person asking to leave is a test subject or a mole. Please bear in mind that the things happening in Ashfield may often seem like unlawful or a violation of human rights. Rest assured, it is all a part of the experiment that the test subjects have agreed to. Should you have any concerns, do not hesitate to call the number on the landline. When I looked up, I noted one such violation immediately. My attention was caught by a woman in the shower. Christ, they had cameras even in bathrooms. A huge breach of privacy, one I wasn't sure how the company managed to evade. But I told myself many weird things were going to be happening in Ashfield. When I finished perusing the papers, I was officially ready to start working at the town. On the first day, I met the townsfolk of the experiment. For the duration of their stay, all the participants were given fake jobs to maintain a sense of normalcy. Aside from the typical 9 to 5, which was 12 to 4 over here, or however long the participant was willing to indulge in the fantasy, the test subjects would go grocery shopping, to the restaurant, the doctor, mechanic, etc. It was as I had said. Everything about Ashfield seemed normal on the most superficial level. Remove the towering walls and the gate, and you could easily fool passers-by who stopped for gas. But the fakeness of the town was just one squint away, constantly looming in your periphery, reminding you Ashfield was just a stage full of actors. The people sure seemed to enjoy this play-pretend experiment. They easily got into their roles of soccer moms and suburban dads and town recluses and average Joes and friendly neighbors. But just like the town, one good look left you wondering what lay behind that mask. As for me, I didn't try to pretend. Unlike them, I had a real job. The overseers of the experiment depended on me to keep the town clean, and I intended to do that. Unfortunately, the easy money would turn out to be not so easy, because on the 5th morning, the strange things at Ashfield started to happen. Baker and I were doing the morning head count of the townsfolk. This was always conducted in front of the medical facility. The people had been particularly lethargic that day, hardly any chatter among them. "Chief, something's wrong," Baker said when he returned from counting. "What is it?" "There's 41 people." I stared at him. "Then count again." I did, 3 times. It's 41. When you're in this line of work, you learn to trust your partner. They give you information, you take it as the truth. The lack of micromanagement was crucial in time-sensitive situations. I didn't know Baker, though. He looked like he was serious about his duties, but for all I knew, he was a nephew of a high-ranking doctor in the experiment who pulled some strings. "Head back to the station. I'll do the head count," I said. When I finished the count, I had 41 people. That couldn't be right. The population of Ashfield was 40 if you didn't count the 6 security personnel. It had been 40 twice a day, every day since my arrival. I counted again, scrutinizing every face in the crowd. Remember their faces. Could it be that one of my team members ended up in the flock in confusion? 41 again. By then, the groans and the hopping from foot to foot and the yawns were becoming more and more apparent. I radioed Baker and told him to call HQ from the landline. A few minutes later, he radioed me back, saying the higher-ups said it was okay to let the people start with the clinical trials. I asked him what they had to say to the surplus, and he said they just told him, "Thank you for reporting this." Although I was clearly baffled by the situation, orders were orders. I let the people head inside. I went back to the security station and went through the roster of test subjects. 41 people. On the first page of the rule book, it said, "The welcome to Ashfield, population 47. I wish things stopped there, because I could then chalk them up to my own insanity. But as these things always go, this was just the beginning of a nightmare. Story number 2. I've always been a seeker, not for money or fame or any of the things most people chase. I've been looking for the truth, the real truth, the kind that hides in the shadows, written in dead languages on brittle parchment. I'm talking about magic, and no, I don't mean the fantasy crap you see in movies or read in novels. I'm not some kid who thinks waving a stick and saying fake Latin will make sparks fly. I'm talking about the real thing, the deep, dark, and often ugly underbelly of human belief, the mechanics of the unseen world. Witchcraft, goetia, theurgy, demonology. That's been my life's work, my obsession. My small, one-bedroom apartment is less of a home and more of a private library. I've spent every spare dollar I've ever earned from my soul-crushing day job on books. Not just the popular stuff, either. Anyone can get a copy of the Lesser Key of Solomon. I went deeper. I have a fragile, translated copy of Shams al-Ma'arif. I've pored over the hateful, fearful prose of the Malleus Maleficarum. I've spent months trying to decipher the complex coded rituals in the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage. I know the names, the sigils, the hierarchies. I know which spirits govern which domains, which incantations are meant to bind, and which are meant to loose. I have all this knowledge, a universe of it, crammed into my head and onto my bookshelves. But for all my study, it's always felt academic, theoretical. I've tried things, of course. Small rituals, scrying attempts, simple evocations in the dead of night. And the result was always the same. Nothing. Just the silence of my apartment, the smell of burnt herbs, and the bitter taste of my own failure. It was like being a master mechanic who had memorized every schematic for every engine ever built, but had never once managed to actually turn a key and hear an engine roar to life. I had the theory down cold, but I was missing something. The spark, the conduit, the real source, as I'd started calling it in my head. I was beginning to think it was all just folklore, intricate, fascinating, but ultimately powerless stories told by people in the dark to scare themselves. I was on the verge of giving up, and then I found the book. It was a total accident, a fluke. I was in a vast old public library downtown, looking for something completely unrelated in their reference section. I took a wrong turn and ended up in a dusty, forgotten corner of the stacks marked Archaic Philology. It was a dead zone. The books looked like they hadn't been touched in a century. And there, shoved horizontally on top of a row of linguistics textbooks, was a book with no markings on its spine. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it down. It was heavy, bound in a plain, deep maroon leather that was worn smooth and felt strangely warm to the touch. There was no title on the cover, no author, no publisher's mark anywhere. The pages were thick, creamy-colored vellum, and they were filled with handwritten script. The ink was a faded brown, and the handwriting was a precise, elegant, but unsettlingly sharp cursive. There was no library card, no stamp, no barcode. It didn't officially exist. I sat down on the floor in that dusty aisle and began to read. And I felt a thrill, a jolt of electricity that I hadn't felt in years. This was different. The language was direct, plain English, but the concepts were astounding. It wasn't filled with the usual cryptic allegories or dogmatic warnings. It read like a practical manual, a textbook for an impossible science. It spoke of reality as a series of overlapping membranes, and of magic as the act of learning how to vibrate at the correct frequency to pass through them, or to pull something through from the other side. It was everything I had been searching for. The theory, but also the application, the why and the how. I knew I couldn't just check it out. It wasn't in the system, but I couldn't leave it there either. This was the discovery of a lifetime. So, I did something I've never done before. I slipped it into my messenger bag, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I walked out of the library. It felt like a transgression, a sacrilege, but I couldn't stop myself. Back in my apartment, I devoured it. For 2 days, I barely ate or slept. The book explained concepts that had always been vague in other texts. It talked about demons not as horned, malevolent entities, but as beings of pure, focused intent from adjacent realities, things that could be drawn to a specific emotional or intellectual frequency, like a moth to a flame. It described rituals not as complex ceremonies with candles and circles, but as simple, focused acts of will and vocalization designed to create a specific resonance. It was late on the third night when I found the passage. It was a simple chapter titled On Reciprocal Observation. The text leading up to it explained that the simplest way to establish a connection with an entity from an adjacent membrane was to make it aware of your existence, to let it see you, so that you, in turn, could see it. It was, the book explained, the most basic and most dangerous form of invitation. Then, there was a small, neat paragraph, indented from the main text. It read, "The following passage, when read aloud with sincere intent, will create a resonance sufficient to attract the attention of a nearby, non-corporeal entity. It will summon a demon. Read it at your own risk." I scoffed. I actually let out a short, quiet laugh in my silent apartment. Read it at your own risk. It was the most cliché, boilerplate warning imaginable. I'd seen variations of it in 100 different books. It was occult window dressing, designed to create an atmosphere of danger and mystique for the uninitiated. This book had been so practical, so direct up to this point, that this sudden dip into melodrama almost felt insulting. It was like reading a brilliant physics textbook that suddenly included a chapter on dragon slaying. I was jaded. I was tired of the failures. I was convinced that this, like all the others, would result in nothing. But the rest of the book had felt so right. So, with a feeling of weary, cynical curiosity, I decided to do it. What was the harm? I took a deep breath, focused my intent as the book instructed, and read the short passage aloud. My voice sounded thin and foolish in the quiet room. "That which is without may now be within. The door that is closed is the door that is open. I see you. See me." And that was it. I waited. I listened. Nothing. Of course. The familiar, crushing weight of disappointment settled on me again. It was all just words. All of it. I sighed, rubbing my tired eyes. A whole life spent chasing ghosts, and all I had to show for it was a stolen library book and another failed experiment. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was so clear, so sudden and unexpected, that I physically jumped. It came from my front door. It wasn't a frantic banging or a weak tap. It was a firm, solid, perfectly normal knock. My mind raced. Who could possibly be at my door at nearly 2 in the morning? I don't have friends who drop by. I hadn't ordered any food. Maybe a neighbor complaining about me talking to myself. I felt a surge of irritation. I got up from my chair, leaving the book open on the table, and walked to the front door. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway outside was empty, bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the flickering fluorescent light. Probably just kids, I thought. Playing a prank. I unlocked the door, swung it open. The hallway was completely, utterly empty. I leaned out, looking both ways. Silence. The elevator at the far end was still. All the other apartment doors were closed. There was no one there. I shrugged, a feeling of anticlimax washing over me. I stepped back inside, closed the door, and slid the deadbolt into place with a heavy, satisfying thunk. A weird coincidence, that's all. I walked back to the table, back to the book. My eyes fell to the page I had left open, to the passage I had just read, and I saw the next line. The line I hadn't read yet. The line that was directly underneath the summoning passage. My brain registered the words before their meaning truly hit me, like seeing the flash of lightning a full second before hearing the thunder. Please, when the door knocks, do not open it. Do not open it for any reason. Do not open it under any circumstances. It must be invited. Do not invite it in. I read the words once, twice, a third time, and the blood drained from my face. My breath hitched in my chest. A cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room began to seep into my bones. A deep, cellular cold of absolute, irreversible horror. The knock wasn't a coincidence. The ritual had worked. I hadn't seen a demon. I hadn't heard its voice. It hadn't materialized in a puff of smoke in the center of my living room. That was the fantasy version. This was the practical version. The book was a manual, and I had followed the instructions perfectly. I had created a resonance. I had attracted its attention. It had come to my door, the threshold between its world and mine. And I, like an idiot, like a fool blinded by my own arrogance and disappointment, had opened it. I had given the invitation. I am writing this now, sitting here in my chair, not daring to move. The book is still open on the table in front of me. I can't bring myself to touch it. I can't bring myself to close it. The air in my apartment has changed. The silence is no longer empty. It's thick, heavy, and watchful. It feels like the silence of a room right after someone has entered and is now standing perfectly still, just behind you, waiting for you to turn around. What do I do? Is there another ritual? Do I burn the book? Do I run? Can I even leave? Or is it attached to me now? Did I invite it into my home? Or did I invite it into my life? Please, if anyone out there knows anything about this kind of reciprocal magic, about what happens when you open the door, please tell me what to do. The silence is getting heavier, and I have the terrible, unshakable feeling that it's not going to stay silent for much longer. Story number 3. I am 28 years old, grew up in a rural province in the Philippines. Back then, we had almost no technology. Even our lights were torch-lit lamps. There were a lot of myths and legends surrounding the area, but this I'd never heard of. I was 13, and my little brother, Joshua, was 9. We were walking home after playing with our friends. It was getting late, the sky growing darker and gloomier. A light drizzle started, so we decided to take the shortcut through the fields. Yeah, bad idea. I know, but it was the shortest path home. Our house was directly on the other side. The grass wasn't too tall, about chest height for the average adult. But we were small Filipino kids, so it towered over us. There was already a path through the weeds, worn down from all the times my friends and I passed through. We'd even placed landmarks, old shoes on sticks and fences, pointing the right direction. Along the way, we'd also built these little statues of ourselves, using big sticks, reeds, old clothes, and random stuff we were proud of. I was a bit of a tomboy back then, so mine had a pellet deagle, confiscated by my dad from some street kids. He was a cop. The thick fog was rolling in fast. It was getting harder to see. The only lights were dim lamps from distant houses, flickering as the wind picked up. Some were already starting to go out. We didn't have much time left, but something felt off as we passed the statues. There were 6 of us in the group. There were 7 statues. I stopped, counted again. Yep, 7. I don't recognize this one. This wasn't ours. It wasn't dressed like ours, just a filthy, tattered sheet draped over its frame. Some parts of it were made of metal, and even weirder. It had too many arms, too long for its body. Some were big, most were small, like someone kept adding extra limbs just to see what would stick. They hung at odd angles, stiff in some places, too loose in others, like they didn't fully know how to use them. Who made this one? Maybe for one of my friend's little siblings? Maybe someone new joined the group? I didn't have too much time to think. It was getting dark. The light rain turned into a downpour. We started sprinting. It was raining so heavily it hurt when it hit our backs. As we ran, I began to hear faint creaking behind us, and more footsteps than there should have been. Then my brother tripped. We were holding hands, so I fell with him. The ground was muddy and sloped. We slid back several feet. I got up, laughing a little. "Are you okay?" No answer. He was gone. My heart sank. What? How? He was right next to me. "Joe!" I shouted. "Joshua, where are you?" No answer. I searched the area, panicked. Then I heard the creaking again, off to the left, clanking footsteps, a strong, awful smell of rust carried by the wind. I headed toward the sound, still calling out, "Joe, let's go home." Then I saw light. A lamp? How? The wind was so strong. It should have been blown out by now. Still, I rushed toward it like a moth to flame. I was just a few steps away when the lamp, and whatever was holding it up, suddenly collapsed. The creaking shifted, moving quickly from one side to the other, and the stench disappeared with it, like it was hiding from me. The ground where the light had been was empty, nothing but muddy grass. But when I looked closer, I saw one of Joshua's slippers. The strap was broken. I froze. Somewhere close, I heard a soft, strained, "8." Big sis, barely a whisper, like it came just from behind the tall grass. Weak, tired, but familiar. I scurried to check. Then just when I was about to pull the weeds back, "Hati!" A scream, louder, sharper, and more desperate, rang out behind me. It was Joshua's voice. My head snapped toward it. My legs moved before I could think, and there it was again, the lamp, flickering in the distance like a beacon. I ran toward it, sobbing, "Stay where you are, please." The rusty smell got stronger with every step. As I got closer, I heard breathing. It was dry and raspy, like an old man wheezing. I stopped dead. "Joe?" No answer. Instead, the light inched closer. The creaking grew louder. I could hear more than 2 footsteps, slow, heavy, stomping ones, and light, skittering ones, like something crawling in the mud. It was moving toward me, and it was fast. Immediately I turned and ran, didn't dare to look back. It was chasing me. I could hear it wheezing, clanking, groaning. I saw my house, up ahead, the porch, safety. I banged on the door with all my strength. "Mama, Papa, open the door, let me in." But nobody came. "Let me in," echoed whatever was behind me, in my voice. It was close. I looked around desperately. No other way in. Then I saw the tall coconut tree beside our house. We'd used it for harvesting, so it had carved footholds. I climbed, high. When I reached the top, I looked down. Nothing. Even the light was gone. I couldn't even see the base of the tree that well. That's how dark it was that night. The storm eventually died down. I clung to the trunk until sunrise. As soon as it was bright enough to see, I climbed down, crossed the street, and walked as far from the field as I could, then collapsed on the neighbor's porch. That's all I remember. I woke up in a hospital. I knew it was far from home, since there were tall buildings outside the window. My aunt was there. She told me everything. Apparently the neighbors found me lying on their porch, eyes wide open, muttering "demonio" over and over before passing out. I was hospitalized immediately, bruises and gashes all over, hands and feet turning pale blue. I fell into a coma. Weeks later, I was transferred to a better hospital in the city. Then she told me about Joshua. They found him the next morning, at the foot of his statue, still wearing his other slipper, unrecognizable, dismembered beyond belief, as if he was ripped open by a bear. But there are no bears in the Philippines. She asked what happened. I told her everything. I knew she wouldn't believe me, but she never called me crazy. Understanding the trauma I was in, she let me stay with her in the city until I was ready to face the world again. Today, I work as a criminal investigator, mostly missing children's cases. And now, I'm back here. Back in the quiet little village of San Isidro. Back to investigate another missing child. One that vanished exactly like my brother did. We're staying the night at the child's home. My team's asleep. We start at sunrise. The wind stopped hours ago. No crickets, no dogs barking. Just silence, so thick, it feels like the house is holding its breath with me. I can hear it, wheezing, groaning, clanking. That ever so familiar stench of rust, back in the air. It's outside. It knows I'm awake. It never tried the door, never knocked. It just waits, like it knows the house can't protect me forever, like it has all the time in the world. It remembers me. It's welcoming me home. I'll be sure to see you tomorrow. Oh, how I missed this feeling of dread. I'm posting this to warn the parents who might read this. Be strict about curfews. Make sure your children come home on time. No one deserves to go through what my family did. Keep your kids inside at night, please. As for me, I don't think I ever truly left that night behind. Part of me is still up there, clinging to that tree, waiting for the sun to rise. And the other part, it's the one staring out the window right now, watching the dark, listening. I know it's not over. It waited once. It'll wait again. And next time, I might no longer have a tree to climb. Story number 4. I am on vacation, visiting family in Colorado. I previously lived here for 4 years, but moved to Texas last year. While I lived here, I explored many of the surrounding trails and historical sites. Never have I felt anything like I did on this hike. I was looking on all trails to find a short hike that I hadn't been to before, when I came across one called Mason Gulch. It was an easy hike, maybe 4 miles total with about 400 feet of elevation change. Perfect for a morning hike before the summer heat made it miserable. The road getting there was rough, according to multiple people on all trails, but it was surprisingly smooth. There wasn't anyone even out there, which was amazing. I prefer to hike where it's just me and nature. The first 3-4 of the hike wasn't too bad. The hike followed a small stream through the gulch. There was a good-sized burn scar at the trailhead from a fire last year, but there was plenty of shade and flowers maybe a quarter of a mile in. I ran into a doe at one point that nearly gave me a heart attack. We both gave a nonverbal hello before she ran uphill into the brush. That's when things started to feel off, though. Every few minutes I'd hear something moving in the brush. It wasn't small, like a squirrel or a bird. No, it made deliberate steps that cracked branches and ruffled the leaves. I kept playing it off as another deer, or maybe a rabbit, but my gut told me a different story. Once I reached the 3-4 mark, something in my stomach turned. I felt very nauseous suddenly. I've never felt like that on a hike before, and to feel that sick without feeling anything before was just odd. I tried to keep going until I began dry heaving against a tree. I tried to catch my breath against a tree when I heard it, the faintest sound of whispers. I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but there was a woman's voice who was gentle, and a man's voice that was louder and more harsh. I, at first, thought it might be other hikers. I collected myself and started to walk back, faster than before. The voices would quiet down, then the rustling in the brush would fill the void. I always hike with a pistol as a safety precaution. I pulled it just slightly above, resting in the holster, and kept my hand ready on the handle. The whispers seemed to come back in response to this, the male voice dominating more this time. I walked faster. I peered down at my phone to check how close I was. I knew I had to be almost back. I still had a little over a mile to go. When I looked up, something caught my eye. What looked like an old wall. It was maybe 8 feet by 3 feet and 2 feet tall and made of dry, stacked rock. The whispers fell into an eerie silence. I love exploring old history. I can't help myself. I ignored my gut and walked toward the wall. It sat at the edge of a meadow. The hill on the far side of it was dotted with small bushes and flowers. It was calm and peaceful there. My stomach even felt better. Odd, I thought to myself. I walked through the meadow to see if I could find anything else. There were some rocks on the far side that seemed out of place and some shards of porcelain and glass laying around them. I took one last look at the wall. Why would something like that just be out in the woods with no other signs of civilization? I knew the answers wouldn't be found there, and I still had to make it out of there. I took a deep breath and returned to the woods. My stomach immediately began to twist again. The whispers quietly trailed behind, as if they were beginning to lose interest in the chase. The rustling, though, persisted. I was close to the end, a quarter mile left, and it was almost all in the open. To my right was the hill with the burn scar. To my left was all scrub brush. I was walking as fast as I could, jumping over fallen trees and swiftly brushing aside branches. Then a sound stopped me in my tracks. Thump, thump, thump. I drew my pistol, switched to fire, and aimed at the noise. Silence. I scanned the direction of the fire scar the noise had come from. Could it have been a rock? What would have moved the rock? The ground is so dry. Surely I would see dust if it was just a rock that fell. Even the birds fell silent. Something wanted me to know it was there, and it was making sure I left. I kept my pistol drawn and at the ready, but walked as fast as I could toward my escape. My mind was focused solely on leaving and never coming back. I rounded the corner to the where I had parked, and I felt so relieved. For a second, the nausea faded in favor of that joyous sight. I got in my truck as fast as I could, threw it in reverse, but before I sped off, I took one last look. There were no other cars, no signs at any point that there had been any other living person in that forest with me. Who was whispering? What was following me? Why did that meadow feel so different from the rest? What's worse is, I can't explain it, but as I drove away, I swear out of the corner of my eye, I saw something almost human, like standing at the edge of the forest. I don't know what I found. I don't know why it wanted me gone so badly. All I know is that as soon as I left, I felt miraculously better, and that I will never be back in that stretch of forest ever again. Story number 5. Do you remember the games you played as a child? Running around outside, making up rules, inventing magic where there was none? Maybe not. Maybe that era was already gone by the time you grew up. But I'm sure a few of you, old farts like me, still remember. Those days were magic. We'd stay out past sunset, climbing trees, chasing each other barefoot through the grass, playing whatever game we could dream up on the spot. but there was one we always came back to. It seemed harmless, just another bit of childhood nonsense, but even then, something about it felt different. We called it a game, but after that night, I knew better. Its name was Fox Feather. None of us really remembered who taught us the game. It was just something we did, like it had always been there, passed down from older kids, or whispered at sleepovers until it became real. The rules were simple enough. Each of us would bring a pine cone, plucked from the woods behind our homes, and someone would fetch a single feather. Back then, nearly every backyard had a few chickens or ducks pecking around, and feathers were as easy to find as pebbles. Finally, at dusk, we'd all meet at a place we called Huldra's Rest, a clearing just past the creek. There we'd place our pine cones in a circle and set the feather in the center. Then we'd leave, returning only in the next day. If one of the pine cones was missing, the owner of that pine cone had to return that night, alone, to Huldra's nest and bring the feather back. It might have sounded simple, even silly, but the thought of walking into those woods alone after dark chilled us in ways we couldn't always explain. Maybe it was the stories, the ones whispered just before bed, about the Huldra and the children who vanished without a sound. Or maybe it was just the trees themselves. At night, they felt alive in a way that pressed against your spine, like they were listening. Every time we returned to check the pine cones, we stood in silence, breath held, thinking the same thing. Please don't let it be mine. I remember that day like it just happened. My little sister, Ruth, stood over the circle, staring at the space where her pine cone should have been. Her face went pale, blank, like all the color had drained out at once. Around her, the others exhaled in unison, relieved it wasn't their turn. A few laughed too hard. Someone muttered a story about the Huldra and her appetite for the youngest. It was all part of the ritual, teasing, joking, pushing just enough to scare the unlucky one. Ruth, however, didn't laugh. She didn't even move. She simply stared at the empty space. The rest of the afternoon unfolded like any other. The boys threw stones at tree trunks and dared each other to climb the tallest branches. Someone started a game of tag, half-hearted and lazy in the heat. There was laughter, chasing, the usual roughhousing of children killing time before dinner, all except Ruth. She stood apart from the noise, leaning against a crooked tree with her arms folded tight across her chest, eyes fixed on the woods. She didn't speak, didn't laugh, didn't move unless startled. As the sun slipped lower, the light shifted, the way it does in late summer, turning the grass long and gold, and with each passing minute, her stillness grew more intense. I glanced at her now and then. Her face had gone pale. She wasn't blinking much, and when someone brushed past her or shouted too close, she flinched like she'd been stung. By the time the first shadows started to stretch out from the trees, she looked like she might be sick. Then just before the sun dipped beneath the hills, she came to me without a word and grabbed my arm. Her fingers were like ice, her grip tight, and I felt a shiver crawl up the side of my neck the moment she touched me. "I don't want to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I looked at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "It's just a game," I said. "It'll be fine. We've all done it." That wasn't true. My name had never come up. "But I'll get lost," she whispered, tears pooling. "It's so dark." I sighed. "It's the rules." "Come with me," she whispered, her fingers latching onto my arm with more strength than I expected. Her nails bit into my skin as if she were clinging to the edge of a cliff. I didn't want to go. God, I didn't. The thought of those woods after dark made my stomach knot. The stories we told, silly little things in daylight, suddenly felt like warnings we'd been too stupid to understand. "I can't," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The rules say you have to go alone. Just to the creek," she begged. "You can watch from there. Please." I hesitated, glancing at the blackness between the trees. They were just stories, I told myself. Nothing more. I nodded. Ruth let out a shaky breath like she'd just dropped a boulder from her back. "You can't go with her," one of the boys shouted from behind us. "She's got to go in alone." Another chimed in. "I'm only going to the creek," I shouted back. "The rules say Huldra's Rest, not the woods." They grumbled, but I stood my ground. Eventually they let it go. I grabbed Ruth's hand, and together we stepped into the trees while the others taunted us from behind. The creek wasn't far, barely a 5-minute walk in daylight, but now, under the weight of shadows, it felt endless. We moved slow, carefully placing each step. We didn't speak. My throat was tight, like something had knotted it shut. The forest creaked and murmured around us, never still. Distant branches cracked like dry bones, some far beyond the tree line, others much too close, just beyond sight. The deeper we went, the more the air felt wrong, heavy with something I couldn't name. Cold gathered in the hollow of my spine, and every step sent a fresh wave of goosebumps across my skin. I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't alone, that something moved with us, just out of sync, just out of reach, watching from the dark with eyes I couldn't see. I imagined it lunging out from the dark, dragging me into the underbrush, ripping into me where no one would find the pieces. Finally, the sound of running water reached us, soft, steady. I exhaled, but it came out shallow. "There," I whispered. Ruth flinched like I'd slapped her. "I don't want to go any further," she said, pulling up short at the edge of the creek. "You have to," I said, but my voice cracked. "No," she whimpered. "The Huldra lives there. There's no such the—" A hoot rang out above us, loud, abrupt, and far too close. It cut through the stillness like a stone, shattering glass. Ruth flinched so hard, she nearly stumbled backward, a sharp gasp tearing from her throat. Then the panic took her. She began to cry, suddenly, fully, as though the sound had snapped the last thread holding her together. I reached for her, tried to pull her back to calm, but her hands were already shaking, her voice fractured. "You have to get the feather," she sobbed, eyes wide and distant, as if she could already see what waited for her in the dark. My mouth opened, then closed again. My feet didn't want to move. "You'll stay here? Right here?" I asked, unsure of what else to do. Ruth nodded fast, wiping her nose. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to stay here any longer. I just wanted to finish this, fast. I stepped carefully across the creek, avoiding the cold water to seep into my sneakers as I hopped from one slick stone to the next. On the other side, the air shifted. It was thinner somehow, laced with a scent that reminded me of crushed flowers and damp moss, earthy and sickening. The clearing opened in front of me like a mouth, pale and quiet. Moonlight filtered through the branches above, just enough to make out the ring of pine cones, undisturbed. Except the feather was gone. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, scanning the grass, the dirt, the rocks. It wasn't there, not anywhere. The feather we'd placed in the center had vanished. Then behind me, a voice, raspy and low. "Not yours." I turned sharply, heart in my throat. And then I heard it, something crashing through branches, heavy, fast, like someone running away. It came from the direction of the creek. "Ruth, she's leaving me." The thought surged through my head. Panic ignited in my chest, and I bolted. I needed to catch her, I can't be alone in here. I reached the edge of the clearing, just in time to see something leap across the creek. But it wasn't Ruth. The shape was too tall, limbs too long, its posture warped. It landed on all fours, then straightened, neck craning unnaturally. A scream started, Ruth's voice high and sharp. But it didn't finish. It cut off mid-breath, like a flame drowned in cold water. Then nothing. No wind, no rustling, just the steady rhythm of the creek. In that stillness, two golden eyes lifted from the far side of the water and locked onto mine. They weren't human. There was no confusion or hesitation in them, just hunger, sharp and clear, and something worse, knowing, not curiosity, not instinct, recognition. My breath caught. My body didn't move, couldn't. The thing stared through me, and for a second I was certain that if I blinked, I'd never open my eyes again. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the eyes disappeared, folded into the dark, like they'd never been there. Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, crashing into the creek, the shock of cold water barely registering as I stumbled across. I shouted Ruth's name again and again until my throat became raw, eyes straining through the trees, but nothing moved. Nothing answered. I reached the other side and stood there, chest heaving, throat burning. The silence pressed in around me until it felt like I was the only thing left alive. I sank to my knees. My hands hit the dirt, and the sobs came fast, spilling out before I could stop them. I don't know how long I stayed like that, curled in the muck with the weight of everything crashing down at once. Time didn't pass. It just sat on me. Eventually I felt arms around me, bigger, steadier, pulling me up. Someone spoke, but I didn't hear the words. It was the sheriff. He'd found me. The boys had run when they heard the screams. They'd told someone. A search party had already begun combing the woods. I hadn't thought about fox feather in years. Not until this morning, when my daughter asked where she could find a feather. "Why do you want one, sweetheart?" I asked, zipping up her backpack. She smiled and shrugged. "It's for a game," she said. "There's a new girl, Ruth. She wants to play with us tonight." Story number 6. For as long as I can remember, I have always had extremely vivid dreams. They heavily affect my day-to-day life and feel like memories, if anything. If my dreams are stressful or deeply emotional, I'll have a difficult time getting through the day, and sometimes it's completely ruined. I've even called out of work because I just couldn't adjust to reality in time. Is this frustrating? Yes. But the consistency in which I have my odd dreams gives me something to look forward to. The anticipation of visiting another world for even just a few hours is tantalizing, to say the least. Everyone has woken up suddenly to then try to fall back into the same dream before. Right. On Monday night, I had just come home from a double shift at work. I was exhausted. I followed the same ritual as I always had for the last few years. I scrounge for some kind of food, take some drugstore melatonin, and listen to music as I quickly slip into my dreams. Now, I've had some weird dreams in my life. I've had dreams where I was married with kids, fought myself in a boxing ring, even visited countries that don't exist. But that night, I had a dream that felt more grounded than ever before, more than lucid. I was on my back, staring at a cloudy sky. I couldn't move, not even my eyes. All I could see was what was directly in front of me and what was in my peripheral vision. I was on the floor of a small wooden boat, or something similar. Although I couldn't sense anything physically, I felt remarkably claustrophobic. Rain was pelting my face. The drops of water hitting my eyes blurred my vision, and the boat was audibly crashing against the waves. It took me far too long to make out the shape of something else in the boat with me. As the rain lightened up, I began to make out the sound of labored breathing. A strong wave managed to roll my body against the side of the boat, forcing my head to crane down in the direction of this breathing thing. It was wearing a hooded brown robe that covered its whole backside, weathered from the elements. It genuinely felt like an hour had passed in my paralysis. In my other dreams, I could feel myself slowly fading away from the world I was visiting, but here it only became more real, almost like waking up completely. Even my most lucid dreams had their limit. I could always force myself to wake up. I could sense the wood against my fingers. The rain was cold and it stung my face. I was able to completely turn my face away from the rain. Control of my eyes came slowly after. That's when I felt it, badly. My insides twisted horribly. I must have puked a gallon of water, maybe more. That's when it turned around. My paralysis was gone. Now I was simply frozen in terror. I'm no stranger to aliens, demons, and strange creatures in my dreams. But this was no longer a dream to me. I was in this boat with a real monster that I will never forget. Its head was fleshy, and its face had vertical slits, like a vent. It was breathing hard. Air was visibly puffing out of its slits. No words needed to be exchanged to tell in that moment. It wasn't expecting me to move. It began to turn its whole body towards me as I was pulling myself over the edge of the boat to see the water. It was nearly black. I leaned closer to dip my hand when it grabbed my arm hard. I looked down and froze once again. A grotesque, three-fingered hand was wrapped around my arm like I was a lost child. My stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. Its skin was pale gray and looked aged. It moved its giant hand to my chest and pushed me down against the floor of the boat. It took one last look at me as it heaved itself back over the seat it rested on, breathing even harder as a result. I faced the sky once again, and as if I was instantaneously transported between blinks, I was back on my bed. I started to write down everything I could before I forgot, as it was definitely beyond any dream I had, and I wanted to remember, and that was all. However, I wouldn't rush to the internet just to write about something like this. But last night, I had the same dream. While recurring dreams aren't irregular for me, it's never exactly the same. I was back on the same exact boat, staring at the exact same cloudy sky. This time, however, I wasn't frozen, and I was able to sit up almost immediately. I was met with the same monster, still rowing the boat. Now that I was back, I took more time to analyze my surroundings. I hadn't even realized until then how giant my captain was. It was definitely taller than anyone I had ever seen. I looked over its shoulder to the direction we were headed. On the horizon, between the gray sky and black ocean, I could just barely make out a thin, flat strip of land incredibly far away. I turned to look back from where we came, and saw nothing but the sky and large swells of the inky ocean. I glanced at the creature to see if it had noticed my consciousness, and then quickly dipped my hand into the water. It was warm and oily. My hand was stained black. As my arm began to dry in the wind, I saw that my pajamas were also stained in the same fashion, like I had been soaked in the same black goop. It must have been raining the same stuff. The creature snapped its head towards me. Its body language felt aggressive, or maybe annoyed. I pushed myself back as close as I could against the edge of the boat and pulled my knees against my chest, hugging them tightly. It had no eyes, so I just stared into the cuts on its face. The flesh of his head looked wet and squishy, sort of brain-like. It swung its legs over the seat and fully focused its attention on me. I could see that under the coat, Its feet were just as alien. It positioned its hands to continue rowing while facing me. After many silent hours, the thin stretch of land came no closer into view. Just like before, I was suddenly awake, with my legs against my chest. I don't know if I can even call this a dream anymore. It feels like I've only changed locations. I'll write again if anything else strange happens. Thanks for reading. Story number 7. Have you ever stared into something so wrong, so fundamentally alien, that your brain simply refused to process it? Like your mind hit an invisible wall and just shut down. What if there are rules to reality we're not meant to question? Rules that break you the moment you break them. And what if, one night, in a place forgotten by the rest of the world, someone did? My name is Mason, and I should have never said yes to that job. They called it Black Hollow Station, a cold, hollow echo of a name that matched the emptiness around it. Located deep in the wasteland, hundreds of miles from the nearest human settlement, it was a concrete wound buried in snow and silence. No roads, no towns, no signs of life. Just wind that howled like a mourning beast, and a sky that never blinked. They say silence is peaceful, but not here. Here, silence felt watchful, like the earth had exhaled and was waiting to see if you'd flinch. I took the job out of desperation, pure and simple. My bank account was hanging by a thread, and when the listing appeared, it looked like salvation disguised as a job posting. Night surveillance operator, remote research station, 6 months, high pay. Sounded harmless enough. Sit in front of monitors, drink some coffee, get paid. The salary? Obscene. Double what I'd made in a year, plus room, board, and a guaranteed bonus. Too good, I realize now. Far, far too good. That should have been my first warning, but I was broke, and broke people don't ask enough questions. When I arrived, I expected some sort of welcoming orientation, maybe a tour. What I got instead was a silent man waiting in the snow. He stood motionless outside the steel entrance, tall, bald, face like carved granite. His parka was bone white, stitched with a black insignia that looked like an eye inside a triangle. He didn't smile, didn't shake my hand, just said, in a voice so dry it might have flaked away in the cold, "We'll go over the rules first. That's the most important part." He handed me a laminated card. The letters were bold and red, like warnings scrawled in blood. Never open the observation room door between 1:11 a.m. and 2:47 a.m. If the hallway lights flicker, do not move. Hold your breath until they stop. At 3:03 a.m., check camera 6. If the room is empty, you're safe. If someone is standing there, do not look away until they vanish. If you hear knocking in the ventilation shafts, ignore it. Do not speak back. At 4:44 a.m., go to the main generator room. Count the humming sounds. There should be 5. Report any deviation. Never under any circumstance open the northern exit. I let out a weak laugh, expecting him to crack a grin. "Is this a joke?" I asked. He didn't even blink. "These are not suggestions, Mason. Break one, and you won't survive the night." The way he said it, like someone repeating a fact he'd watched unfold too many times, strangled the laughter in my throat. Still, I told myself it had to be some kind of psychological experiment. This was a research facility, right? Maybe I was the experiment. The first few nights passed without incident. The cameras fed me an endless loop of still, empty corridors. No movement, no noise, no surprises. Just the occasional gust of wind whining against the metal walls and the distant hum of generators churning through the dark. I followed the rules, out of habit more than fear. Sip coffee, Watch screens, wait, rinse, repeat. By night 5, I'd almost convinced myself the whole thing was a test, some elaborate boredom endurance trial. And then came night 6. It was 1:12 a.m. I remember the time exactly, because that's when the door handle to the observation room twitched. Not creaked, not wiggled. Twitch, like a muscle spasm in metal. My blood turned to slush. Rule 1. I was past the danger time. I froze, cup halfway to my lips. The door handle rattled again, just once more. Then silence. No footsteps, no retreating echo. Just nothing. At 1:34 a.m., the hallway lights started flickering. Rule 2. I stopped breathing. My throat constricted, as if invisible hands had clamped shut around it. 10 seconds. Maybe less. But in that moment, time lost all meaning. My heartbeat pounded so hard, I was sure the sound alone would get me killed. When the flickering stopped, I gasped like I'd clawed my way out of a coffin. Still no movement on the cameras. Still no noise. But something had changed. The air felt wrong, like the station had noticed me. And then the clock ticked to 3:03 a.m. That's when everything changed. The monitor's soft glow lit up the room as I turned to camera 6, just like the rule commanded. It showed the same storage room I'd seen a dozen times before. White walls, metal shelves lined with labeled crates, and a flickering ceiling bulb that buzzed like an insect caught in glass. At first it was empty, and then he was there. No movement, no sound, no transition, just a man, suddenly in the dead center of the room, standing, frozen, facing the camera like he'd been waiting, watching, or worse, knowing. His mouth hung wide open, but not like he was screaming. No sound came out. It was just open, like his jaw had disconnected, and he'd forgotten how to fix it. His eyes, my God, his eyes. They bulged like something behind them was trying to get out. No blinking, no twitch, just raw, silent panic radiating from every inch of his face. And he was staring right at me, or through me. I couldn't tell which was worse. My muscles locked. My skin crawled like ants were burrowing beneath it. My throat dried up. My sweat turned cold, and my heart thudded like a war drum in my ears. But I remembered the rule. Do not look away. So I stared. My eyes stung, my vision blurred, my spine screamed to turn away. But I didn't, couldn't, and then he was gone. Not a step, not a fade. One frame he was there, the next. Nothing, like he'd been erased. That was the moment it hit me. These weren't rules, they were rituals. And breaking one wasn't an accident, it was a death sentence. I wanted to leave. I wanted to scream, to throw my badge on the floor and tell Ellis I was done. But that option didn't exist. The chopper only came once a month. I had 3 weeks left. 3 long, cold, blood-curdling weeks. And if I walked out before my contract ended, no paycheck, no transportation, no guarantee I'd even make it through the snow. So I stayed. And the next night, I followed the rules like they were holy scripture. At exactly 4:44 a.m., I made my way to the generator room, just like Rule 5 said. The room smelled like burning ozone and old copper. The generators thrummed in the dark like sleeping beasts. I closed my eyes and listened to those hums. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, nothing. My stomach turned to ice. The silence wasn't quiet. It was active. It pressed against my eardrums like a held breath, waiting for me to flinch. And then, a whisper. Help. Soft, fragile, like it had bled out through a slit in reality. It came from behind the generator. I didn't move, didn't speak. You're not supposed to be here. This time, the voice was right next to my ear, like it had bent time and space just to crawl beside me. My body acted before my brain did. I bolted, sprinted through the icy halls with adrenaline burning my veins. I slammed the control room door and locked it behind me, collapsing into the chair like I'd been shot. My hands trembled violently. I could barely type. I sat there, paralyzed, until the sun bled pale light across the horizon. Later that morning, Dr. Ellis strolled in, like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just had a conversation with something not human in the dark. I told him everything. The missing fifth hum, the whisper, the voice right beside me. He didn't blink, just rubbed his jaw and said flatly, "You only heard 4 hums?" "Yes," I said, and something whispered, twice. He looked disturbed, not shocked, not confused, just disturbed, like someone who'd seen this pattern unfold before. "That's concerning," he muttered. "Did it touch you?" The question nearly stopped my heart. "No," he nodded slowly. "Then you're still okay. But if it talks to you again..." He paused, then locked eyes with me. "Do not answer it." I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want to know there could be a next time. But quitting wasn't an option, not without losing everything. So I forced myself to stay. In hindsight, that choice sealed my fate. 2 nights later, it happened. I broke a rule, not on purpose, not out of rebellion or carelessness. It happened because something changed the rules. And from that moment on, I was no longer a watcher. I had become the watched. The cameras started showing rooms that didn't exist. Doors opened on their own. And at 1:11 a.m., something knocked. From inside the observation room. I didn't mean to break the rule, but I did. And what came out when I opened that door wasn't human. The hallway lights flickered again. Rule 2. That should have been my cue. Freeze, hold my breath, become a statue and wait for it to pass. And I did. At first. But then my radio hissed. A burst of static snapped through the silence like lightning through still water. Mason, come to the observation room. Emergency. Come quick." It was Ellis. Or at least, it sounded like him. Instinct took over. I gasped just once. A sharp inhale. A human reaction to panic. The air burned as it filled my lungs. I hadn't meant to breathe. I just did. And worse, I'd moved. My body had tensed, my hand twitching toward the radio before I remembered the rule. I had broken it. Everything went silent. So silent that even my heartbeat felt intrusive. And then, the lights turned red. Not dim, not off. Red, like blood soaking through snow. I hadn't even known the facility could do that. A high-pitched ringing bled through the hallway outside the control room, an unnatural tone, like glass grinding against teeth. I turned to the monitors, already knowing I wouldn't like what I saw. Every hallway was black, swallowed in shadow, except one. On that screen, something was crawling. It didn't walk. It didn't even stagger. It crawled, rapid and erratic, like a centipede that had just been set on fire. Its limbs moved too fast, bending the wrong way, jittering like a corrupted video file. And then it stopped, right outside my door. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even think. I just sat there, paralyzed, praying to gods I'd stopped believing in. Then the scratching began, slow, methodical, not random, but intentional, like it was carving something, claw by claw, stroke by stroke. I could feel it, etching madness into the metal, marking me. Morning came, eventually, though I didn't remember the sun rising. It just happened. I cracked the door open, expecting claw marks, evidence, something. But there was nothing. The door was smooth, stainless, untouched, as if the night had been nothing more than a hallucination. But I knew better, because something in me had cracked. A hairline fracture in the mind, a splinter in the soul. My sanity hadn't just bent, it had started to bleed. I found Ellis in the lab, sipping coffee like it was just another day in hell. But I didn't wait this time. I slammed my fist on the table. "What the hell is this place?" I demanded. "What are we really researching?" He looked older than he had the day before. Not just tired, withered, like each night had stolen a year from his face. He sighed, that kind of long, heavy sigh people give when they're about to dump a truth that shatters you. "We're not researching, not anymore." He paused, looked me dead in the eye. "We're containing." That word hung in the air like a curse. "Containing what?" I asked. He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he slid a thick manila folder across the table. Inside were photographs, black and white, low resolution, wrong. Figures that defied anatomy, blurred silhouettes with too many joints, no eyes, too many mouths. One looked like a shadow with bones, another like a pile of spines floating in smoke. I didn't realize I was shaking until I heard the photos rattle in my hands. "We call them residuals," Ellis said. "They're not ghosts, not aliens. We don't know what they are." He gestured around at the facility, but this facility seems to attract them. Maybe it's the cold, maybe the isolation, maybe something older than both. We built this place to keep them here, to keep the rules in place. I asked the question I already dreaded the answer to. "And if the rules are broken?" He didn't hesitate. "Then they get out, or get in." I didn't sleep that day. Couldn't. Even when I closed my eyes, I could see the thing scratching at the door, could feel its presence, like its memory had seeped into the wiring. That night was my last. The last night at Black Hollow, and the worst. Because I was no longer just following the rules. I was about to become part of them. When the lights went out completely, no red, no flicker, just darkness, I realized something had changed. The station wasn't trying to keep them contained anymore. It was trying to keep me in. My last night at Black Hollow was the worst. There's no clever metaphor to dress it up. It wasn't loud. It wasn't bloody. It was personal. Because the thing I saw that night was me. At exactly 3:03 a.m., I turned to camera 6, like I had every night before. My fingers trembled, hovering over the keyboard like they already knew something was waiting. The feed buzzed softly, flickered, then sharpened. It was the same room, the same white-walled storage unit with metal racks, and that single humming light overhead. But this time, there was someone inside, not a stranger, not a shadow. It was me. Same uniform, same posture, same face, but the eyes, gone. 2 black pits that swallowed the screen, not just blank, hungry. And the mouth, it stretched wide, too wide. The grin was unnatural, full of teeth that didn't belong to me. Long, sharp, smiling like it knew exactly what I feared. Then slowly, my reflection, my fake self, tilted its head, like a curious dog trying to understand the noise of a dying animal, and it raised one finger to its lips. Shh. That was all. No movement, no sound, just silence and that horrific, knowing grin. I stared. I couldn't not. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel tears starting behind my eyes, not from fear, from recognition. Some part of me knew. Then, in a blink, it vanished. I didn't wait for protocol, didn't wait for Ellis, didn't wait to see what the rules would demand next. I packed my bag with shaking hands, every zipper scream echoing through the metal halls like alarms. Then I walked to the helipad and sat down. I didn't move, didn't think, just waited, like a body waiting for burial. Eventually, the chopper emerged from the horizon, its blades slicing the sky like they were trying to escape it. 2. The pilot landed but said nothing at first. He just looked at me, then at the facility, then back at me. His face was grim, like he'd done this before, too many times. Then he asked one question. "You followed the rules?" I nodded once. He stared at me a moment longer, then said, "Then don't talk about what you saw. Not to anyone. Ever." The flight back felt unreal. Outside the window, the facility stretched endlessly, just blank whiteness swallowing the world. And Black Hollow shrank into the distance, disappearing into the nothing like a dream you're glad to forget, but never really do. I didn't speak, and neither did the pilot, because there are no words for what we left behind. Only rules. That was 2 years ago. I tried to build a life again, a job, an apartment, people, structure, routine. But some nights I still wake up, always at the same time, 3:03 a.m. And when I do, I never look directly in the mirror right away, because once, just once, I did, and I saw myself blink. But I hadn't blinked. That thing in the mirror, it blinked first. Now I keep the lights on at night. I follow little rituals. I whisper rules under my breath before bed, just in case, because sometimes I wonder if I ever really left Black Hollow, or if Black Hollow just followed me. Some places don't want to be left behind, and some rules aren't meant to be broken, because they're the only thing keeping you from being replaced. Story number 8. You don't expect to get haunted working at a damn arcade. Sticky soda floors, screaming kids, busted ticket machines. Yeah, but real ghosts? No one trains you for that. I was the manager of the Pit, a local mega arcade that used to be an old strip club owned by some gangsters before they turned it into a flashing, buzzing kid trap. Everyone in town went there. Birthday parties, first dates, sad divorces, probably. It was always busy, loud. And underneath that noise, something else. It started in the laser tag arena. The arena had this swinging black door, no lock, just one of those push-to-open types. But every now and then it wouldn't open. You'd slam into it, and it felt like someone was holding it shut on the other side, pushing back. And there was no one else in there. I'd be alone. We all joked about it at first, called it Frank, after the tall shadow figure we'd seen more than once. He'd stand beside you in the laser tag office, watch from the loft above the arcade, arms crossed. I'd glance up, and there he'd be. Still, watching. The second you looked straight at him, gone. The employees started clocking sightings like it was normal, like, "Yo, Frank's in the ticket counter again." Cool, let him know we're out of Tootsie Rolls. But it wasn't funny for long. There was also her. We didn't give her a name. She didn't want one. A little girl, long black hair, dirty dress, eyes that didn't shine under the fluorescence. She mimicked voices. That's how she got you. "Ash, come in here." It would echo out from the laser tag maze, like a coworker was calling me, like someone needed help. But I was alone, every time. I started bringing gear, stuff I bought after falling down ghost hunting YouTube rabbit holes, spirit boxes, those cat ball toys that light up when touched, a cheap EMF detector, even a REM pod. I convinced the night shift crew, Zach and Josh, to help me. We'd wait until the place was slow and empty and try to talk to whatever was there. The spirit box would sputter, and sometimes, a voice would break through. "Don't leave. Stay." Demon. I never told the others what that last one meant. Not really. See, I already had something attached to me. Stupid teenage me, trying to impress my friends in a graveyard. Ouija board, candle circle, Some Latin we read off a Tumblr post. Classic cursed starter pack. Ever since then, I'd feel watched in mirrors, hear my name whispered in static, dream about black dogs with too many teeth. So when things got worse, when the hauntings started bleeding into our homes, I knew I was the problem. Zach said his lights would flicker, and he would see shadow people in his house when he was alone. And his pet birds would start talking to things that weren't even there. And me, I'd wake up to the sound of my own voice calling from the hallway. Ash, Ash, Ash. Then silence. Then the sound of something breathing just behind the door. Eventually, corporate let me go. Budget reasons, they said. Sure, but I saw the way they looked at me, like I was bringing something with me, like they were scared of me now. It's been almost 2 years. I moved. New job, no arcades, no graveyards, but the hauntings never stopped. The shadows still stretch wrong in the corners of my bedroom. The cat balls still light up at 3 a.m., rolling toward my bed. My name still gets whispered by a voice that sounds like mine. And sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, it's watching. Story number 9. I work what should be a rather mundane job as a night guard for my local cemetery. In theory, it should be a boring, although creepy job, that it isn't for the faint of heart. At this cemetery, there are only 2 rules that I'm required to follow. 1. The gates are locked at 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. every night. 2. Never talk to anyone, or let them out once the gates have been closed. If I see anyone inside of the cemetery over the course of the night, I am to say nothing and stick to my nightly tasks. Every hour I am to make sure that either the north gate or south gate is locked, while the other night guard checks the other with us rotating the gate every hour. While many would think that the purpose of a guard in a cemetery would be to tell people off for trespassing during the night, those inside might find that I am the one trespassing. Usually a few of these people will try and start up a conversation, asking me any number of questions while I waste time between gate checks. I have heard many life stories and ambitious goals during my time working here. On the unfortunate night, 1 or 2 of those voices will scream at me to just unlock the gate because they aren't supposed to be in there. On really bad nights, the angriest spirits will turn into demonic form to try and intimidate me into compliance. The best thing to do is simply ignore it. With how crucial we are told for both gates to be kept locked, there are a few other guys that I work with. Isaac, Kyle, and Eli have all worked here longer than I have. Each one follows the 2 rules religiously, and each has their own horrific experience that has made their vow of silence cemented when the gates are locked. The first couple of years working here had always made me question what would happen if I did talk to one of the strangers I saw within. Discovering what happens left a terror in me that has kept my mouth sealed as soon as the gates are locked. It had been the same thing as every night before. I got to work at 8 and sat down for the present meeting. After trading a few words with Isaac, we set off to lock up and began idling, walking around the grounds until the next gate check. Just after midnight, a kid, probably no older than 16, ran up to me and began screaming. Please, please, you have to let me out of here. I snuck in here, and I need to get out. The voices, they won't stop, please, help me. I simply shook my head and backed away. He was lost to whatever spirits owned the night. A few hours later, I was stuck hosing off his remains from the pavilion near the north gate. I had heard when I was in high school that plenty of kids would do the midnight run at the cemetery to prove how brave they were. By climbing a tree by the southeast of the cemetery, you could jump from one of the branches inside. Dumb kids would get inside at midnight, and run to the north gate, where a friend would be waiting to help them hop back over. I was never brave enough to try, and now I was glad I wasn't so foolish. Talking to whatever was lurking inside clearly did not care for the unwelcome disturbance. From what I've been told by Kyle, Saturdays have the most clean-up days. The whole town knows that there is something off about this place. Yet it doesn't keep the brave and dumb from gambling their lives by jumping into hell. I've had the misfortune of witnessing the cruelty up front. A few years ago, a new guy was going to join our ranks to help lighten our schedules. He was given the rundown of the rules and seemed like he would be able to follow them. On his third day of shadowing me, he made the simplest mistake. One of the spirits sneezed, and he said, "Bless you." Just like anyone else would have done, he was thanked. The twisted and gnarled smile that hungrily thanked him had no kindness for him. The sound of his jaw being wrenched open by charred, fleshy hands. Seeing the antlers and jagged skull force themselves into the gaping maw for shelter. Smelling the shit and bile and piss fill the air as someone has a beast twice their size try and enter them like an egg being swallowed by a rat snake. It was the first and last time I tried to train anyone. 14 years. 14 years of locking myself into hell for 9 hours. Sometimes I think about quitting, but the pay is ridiculous. For $1,000 a night, I have to lock the gate and check it every hour. Voices beckon me, call for me, plead to me, beg for me to respond. Unlocking the gate every morning is always a relief because I made it through. I know I can't do it forever, but the thought of having to train a replacement and seeing them suffer a visceral fate terrifies me. Every night I work, I lock the gate and then walk the grounds. I check the lock every hour and go back to walking the ground. Many of the malevolent forces have grown accustomed to my presence and will tell me their tales occupy my time, knowing that I won't ever respond. They still will ask for me to let them out from time to time, but I hope they realize that the gates are only unlocked at 6 p.m. On occasion, some of those spirits will try to make me slip up, but still I stay silent. Their repeated failures anger them, but no matter what form they take to convince me their ire brings no recourse. They cannot touch what does not answer their call. I know that as long as I don't beckon their embrace, I won't have to feel their otherworldly hands take hold of me. From everything I have witnessed, it is a call I will gladly refuse. A new night guard is starting, trained as a replacement for Eli, whose decades working here has left him a wealthy and tired man. He has told me that the new guy, Thomas, is up for the task and knows to stay silent. I still worry. In all the years working here, I still don't know what happens if the gates are ever left unlocked, or what happens if there isn't a guard to make sure the seal is secured, keeping the forces of the night barred from entering the rest of the world. Story number 10. It's a strange feeling to not be sad when someone dies. That's how I felt when my dad told me that I was going to have to miss work to drive 3 states for my great-aunt's funeral. I kept waiting for something to hit me, to suddenly break down and cry like everyone else, but that never happened. Every action I took at the ceremony, every word I said and movement I made, it all felt so fake. If you've ever played a first-person video game, that's how it felt. Just going through the motions. This all sounds pretty heartless, I know, but you have to understand, I'd never even met this woman before she died. I didn't even know that my grandma had a sister. It's hard to muster up feelings for someone you never knew. Doesn't mean I didn't try. The wake is when things really began to feel unreal. I don't really know how to describe it, but everyone there just felt off somehow. Eyes burning into my back, whispers hushed the moment I'd enter a room. I felt like I was at the center of it all. The strangeness got to a breaking point right before I left. Me, my father, and his cousin, Samantha, had all been talking about my aunt. Apparently, she had been in the hospital for weeks prior to her death, suffering from acute heart failure. She had become a very standoffish and belligerent woman in her later years, so one visited her in that time. She was all alone when she died. I just wish I had been there, that I could have said goodbye one last time. Samantha sobbed. "It's all right." She knew how much you loved her, my father consoled. Samantha looked up at me, face wet with tears. "You being here, it really helps. You don't look like her, but somehow, it's like being able to see her one last time." She went to hug me, grabbing me tight to make sure I couldn't slip out of her grasp. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I love you so much. You know that, don't you?" I could feel her tears run down my back as C cried. All her pain, her guilt, she was unloading it onto me. I left shortly after that. Everything started happening about a week after I got home. It started as little things. Sleepwalking, waking up in a different room than I'd gone to bed in. I've experienced sleepwalking in the past, so I didn't think much of it. I wish I did. About a month ago, I woke up from one of my sleepwalking spells standing up. I was facing a full-length mirror in my bedroom, stiff as a board. My shoulders ached as I walked back to bed, stiff and cramping. They continued to ache the next night, and the night after that, and the night after, and so on. I would wake in that same spot, right in front of the mirror. After a week of this, I decided that I was fed up and got myself some melatonin. Maybe I just wasn't sleeping deep enough. I certainly felt like it. My whole neck felt like rock, tendons popping with each movement. I remember getting into bed that night, convinced of good sleep to come. How wrong I was. Like clockwork, I woke up that night in the usual spot. Annoyed and tired, I began to turn my head to my bed, ready to crawl back in. Chark. Pain pierced through my shoulders. It was so blinding that I didn't even notice the warm blood drip on my chest. My eyes went wide, desperate to stop my vision from blurring. It was a miracle I didn't faint. I really wish I had. I looked down without moving my head, eyes adjusting to the darkness. Whatever was holding me down was just out of sight, only appearing as grayish blobs in my peripherals. As slowly and as motionlessly as I could, my eyes slowly glided back to the reflection of the mirror. Hands. Two giant, gray, emaciated hands stared back at me. Each long, bony finger dug into my shoulders, their bulbous knuckles clicking together as they shook. Their thumbs pierced either side of my neck, ensuring my paralysis. The nails on each digit were yellowed and cracked, like wood that had long since rotted. I wanted to scream. God, how I tried. But with every small sound that escaped my lips, the thumbs drilled closer to my throat. A deep gurgle spurted just behind my right ear. Tan et atzma, atzmak lei. It coughed and stuttered, like a blade twisted in its throat with every word. A great dark mass formed at the edge of the mirror, right at the source of the garbled voice. Two eyes, a deep red with bloodshot vessels rooted at a blackened abyss of a pupil, stared through the reflection. Through me. Please, please, please don't kill me. I didn't even realize I had said it out loud before the deep, rasping chuckle began being spat at me. Who are you? The crackled laugh ceased, leaving only silence. The hands lightened their grip ever so slightly. And then before I could process the loosened grip, my head snapped back, the fingers impaling my throat. The last thing I felt was my lungs filling with blood. Karsh, I gasped, as my head colliding with the mirror ripped me back to reality. I grasped at my neck, to find nothing but perfectly intact skin. If anything was damaged, it was my pointer finger, red with a raw nail, presumably damaged from my head-first collision with the mirror. I faltered to get back to my feet, attempting to catch my breath. Was that all really just a dream? As I collected myself, the smallest glimpse of something caught my attention. Illuminated by the moonlight peering through my window, a word had been scratched into the mirror below the crack. Story number 11. "Are we there yet?" I asked, looking out the window. Dad chuckled. I probably asked him the same question 1,000,000 times, but he didn't seem to mind. "I told you, Robbie. We'll be there in a couple of minutes, and don't worry, it won't disappear," Dad said, chuckling again. I was excited about this whole trip because I was going to Dad's movie studio for a couple of days, and I had never been before because Mom always thought it was dangerous. Last night I watched Mom and Dad fighting in the kitchen with each other over letting me go to the movie studio, and how Dad thought I could handle going there. At first I was confused about it because I didn't know where I was going to sleep. Would I sleep in the car, or in the main office where Dad worked? But I was told there was a hotel a few blocks away from the studio where Dad spent the night whenever he had an overnight project at the studio. Actually, Dad didn't just work at the studio. He owned the whole thing. It was his home away from home, and Dad was the master at making movies. Me and my friends had watched every movie he made, and now I was here on my summer break, going to the movie studio where Dad worked, and where I would probably get to see movie filming and maybe even meet famous movie stars. We pulled up in front of the main office, and we both got out of the car. I was told to leave my bag in the car, and I obeyed, because I probably wouldn't need my socks at the studio. I looked around and noticed all the buildings, but I didn't see anyone else, which made me feel a little confused. "Where's everybody else?" I asked. "Oh, they're all busy with their own business, but come on, let's go," Dad said. Both of us walked into the main office, and I looked around the room, seeing a desk and the usual office supplies. But I noticed there was also a couch and a bunch of different movie posters. All of the posters were from the movies Dad made, which were mostly scary movies. But he had made some superhero movies as well. "I better call your mother and tell her we made it safely, or I'll never hear the end of it," Dad said, grinning. Dad sat down at the desk and started calling Mom, and I sat down on the couch, thinking about this whole thing. Would this trip actually be fun for me? Or was it going to be lame and boring, like Mom kept telling me? I heard Dad talking on the phone, but I wasn't really paying attention because I was looking at the ground and thinking about this trip. Suddenly I heard a rattling noise and looked over at Dad, who was still talking on the phone, and apparently didn't hear the noise. I heard the rattling noises again and looked around and noticed that the doorknob was shaking, and it seemed something was breaking to break the door down. "Dad," I shouted. He looked up and then noticed something was happening, and Dad put the phone up, and he looked completely worried. Suddenly the door swung open, and I covered my eyes with my hands, waiting for something to attack us. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I scare you?" a worried voice asked. I uncovered my eyes and noticed an older lady standing there, smiling nervously at me and Dad, and I could tell she was embarrassed. "I thought you were a movie monster," I said. "Well, I'm sorry for the frightening experience, but I'm not a movie monster. I'm just someone who works here," the lady said. "Linda, I thought I'd told you to knock on the door before you came into the office. You nearly scared us to death," Dad said, sounding stern. "I apologize for the confusion, sir. I forgot about knocking, but who's this?" Linda asked. I noticed Linda was wearing a completely black set of clothes, which confused me, but I didn't ask about it. "Oh, this is my son, Robert, and I decided to bring him with me for a few days, and we just arrived," Dad said. "Well, Robert, "It's nice to meet you," Linda said. Linda extended her hand to be shaken, and I did the same, telling her to call me Robbie if she wanted to. "So, is there anything important you wanted to tell me? Or did you come by just to say hello?" Dad asked. "Well, Mr. Sanders, one of the main cameras in the showroom isn't working right, and I was told to come get you so you could figure out what was going on with it," Linda said. "Oh, come on. I'm sorry for this, Robert, but I can't show you around the studio right now. You'll have to wait for a few minutes, so just stay here," Dad said. Without saying anything, Dad patted me on the shoulder and ran out of the office, and apparently he was off to go fix that broken camera. Dad isn't just the studio's owner, he's also a technician, so he helps out anytime something breaks or fails to function properly, like a camera or light. I sighed softly and crossed my arms, and I noticed Linda was still standing in the office with me. And then she cleared her throat, which made me look at her. "I could show you around the studio. I'm pretty sure your father wouldn't mind. And trust me, I know this place like the back of my hand," Linda said. I guess so, if my dad is okay with it," I said, shrugging my shoulders. Linda told me that the tour was starting, and I followed her out of the office where she started talking about the history of the studio. Dad has told me about the history of the movie studio before, but I didn't mind hearing someone else talk about it, because I wanted to hear what they would say. Linda showed me around the world, and where a bunch of different movies were being filmed and worked on. Suddenly I stopped when I noticed a studio building all by itself, and it looked so old it would probably fall over. "Hey, Linda, what's that?" I asked, pointing at it. Linda turned around and looked where I was pointing, and immediately her mouth fell open in shock, and her cheeks turned a ghostly white. "That's the robot graveyard, and no one is allowed in there, and that includes you," she said. What's the robot graveyard?" I asked her. But Linda didn't say anything about it. She just walked away, and I looked at the spooky building before I followed behind her. After the tour was over, I was back in the office with Dad, and he was messing around on his computer, and I was back on the couch. I have to ask him. I need to know, I thought. "Hey, Dad, what's the robot graveyard?" I asked. Immediately, Dad looked up from the computer with a concerned look on his face. I could tell that asking about the robot graveyard was a mistake. "Who told you about that place?" Dad asked me in a suspicious tone. "Nobody. I just saw it when Linda was giving me a tour, and then she told me that I wasn't allowed to go there, and that no one else was allowed in there either," I said. "Well, I guess you should know because you'll probably keep asking me about it. But you know how I'm a technician here, and sometimes the robots we use for movies malfunction. And whenever that happens, I've started putting them in a building, and we named it the Robot Graveyard," Dad explained. "So all you're saying is that it's just a building with 1,000,000 broken robot parts in it?" I asked. Dad just nodded his head and went back to doing whatever he was doing on the computer. I started thinking about the robot graveyard more, and wondering if it was actually as scary as everyone was saying it was. The next day, I decided to take a walk around the studio, because I knew where the main office was. I wouldn't get lost, and I knew not to go inside the robot graveyard. I stopped to take a break, leaned against a wall, and looked around, noticing a bunch of different people who were wearing all black clothes like Linda had. Mom was right. This place is boring, I mumbled under my breath. I was thinking about something I could do. I wanted to find Dad and hang out with him, but I knew I shouldn't interrupt him or anyone else because they were doing important movie things. Maybe I could go do something else where I wouldn't be interrupting anyone. Or maybe I could find Linda and ask her more about the history of the studio. Maybe I could use the office phone and talk to some of my friends and tell them what's been going on. Just then, an idea popped into my brain. I knew Dad and the other workers would be upset with me, but I didn't care. I was going to check out the robot graveyard. Without saying anything, I quietly walked over to the building that was supposed to be the graveyard and looked around, hoping no one would see me. When it was clear, I grabbed the doorknob and twisted it. I expected it to be locked, but instead it opened with a loud creaking noise which scared me. Maybe I shouldn't do this, I thought nervously, but I wanted to see what this place was all about. So I walked into the place and noticed it was completely dark, and I couldn't see anything. So I looked around for something I could use as light, and when I reached over for the light, it actually came on. Why would the lights be working if no one comes here? I mumbled. I started walking around, and I noticed lots of different robot parts, like arms and legs. There were even heads that didn't move, speak, or even blink. As I was walking, something wrapped itself around my ankle, and I looked down and noticed that a robot top half grabbed me. It didn't have its legs, but it still had its head, and I could see into its eyes, and it seemed to have a worried expression that only a human being could have. "You have to save us," it said in a weak voice. "Save you from what?" I asked. "The robot master is going to kill us all," the robot part said. But, I stammered nervously. "You must help us," the robot said. Without even thinking, it kicked the robot off my ankle and bolted deeper into the robot graveyard. I stopped in a big section that was empty, but noticed that a lot of piles were around, and automatically I knew I shouldn't have come into this place. Then I heard a dark robotic laugh coming from behind, so I whipped around, and standing there was a robot that was bigger than me. Parts of its human-like skin were gone, and the part over its face was halfway gone, so I could see its robotic face underneath. "Hello, human. Do you like what you see?" it asked me. "Who are you?" I asked, backing up nervously. "I am the robot master, and humans are not allowed in here," it says. "But you..." I cut myself off because I didn't know what to say. You see, everything in this building I have control over, and since I'm the robot master, they'll listen to me no matter what happens. Suddenly, the robot opened its mouth and let out a loud siren sound. It was so loud that I had to slap my hands over my ears to block it out. But then I noticed something horrible was happening. All the robotic parts were moving towards me like worms or bugs. "Get him, my pets," the robot master said, pointing at me. The parts came closer to me, and then I took off running and dodged all the prices and parts I could. And then I noticed the door was being blocked by the bottom half of a robot. I slid to a stop and waited for it to jump me and use its legs to wrap around my neck and choke me, but instead it jumped on the robot master who was behind me. "What are you doing? You're supposed to be listening to me," the robot master cried out. Suddenly, the top half of the robot that grabbed my ankle walked over using its hands, and I noticed an angry look on its face. "We're tired of listening to you," the robot said. Then, without any warning, a bunch of different robot pieces and parts jumped out of different places and started attacking the robot master. "Go human. Save yourself," the nice half told me. Without saying anything, I busted through the door and slammed it shut. I could hear screaming coming from the other side, but I was standing there, breathing heavily. I need to find Dad and tell him what happened, I thought. So I took off, heading towards the main office, and then I noticed that a group of workers were standing there talking about something. "Hey, you have to help me," I cried out to them. The entire group stopped talking and turned around, and when they all noticed me, they seemed shocked. "Are you okay, young man?" a lady asked. "I just went to the graveyard, I went." I cut myself off to breathe. "You went to the robot graveyard. You're not supposed to go there. It's too dangerous," a man said, sounding concerned. Suddenly, everybody surrounded me in a tight circle and started talking all at once, and I couldn't handle it. "Stop, please stop," I shouted at them all. I slapped my hands over my ears because the sound was getting into my brain and it was hurting. I could actually feel my heartbeat inside my ears, and it wouldn't stop. But nobody was listening to me. They all kept talking and screaming at me about what just happened. Without saying anything, I blacked out, and my hands fell off my ears. I felt myself bend over halfway. "Everyone, step back and give me room," Mr. Sanders shouted. All the workers stepped away from the robotic child, and Mr. Sanders walked up and stood in front of the robot, and he sighed softly. Linda came running up and noticed that Mr. Sanders was upset, and then she noticed the broken robot. "What happened to the robot, Mr. Sanders?" she asked. Without saying anything, Mr. Sanders walked to the back side of the robot and pulled the shirt up from its back. He popped open the compartment, looked at all the buttons and wires, and then noticed something that made him sigh loudly. "It seems the main computer chip is fried. I guess I'll have to go back to the lab and fix it," Mr. Sanders said. Mr. Sanders told Linda to call his wife and tell her what happened to the robot, and she nodded her head and then ran away. "What are you going to do with the robot?" someone asked. "Don't worry, it will be brand new by the time I'm done fixing it," Mr. Sanders said, grinning. Mr. Sanders grabbed the robot and tossed it over his shoulder, and then without another word, he headed back to the technician lab so he could fix up his creation. Story number 12. The museum was a cathedral of the uncanny, a place where art bled into nightmare. Its architecture warped the senses, glass floors suspended over yawning darkness, corridors folding back on themselves, mirrors fracturing reflections into infinity. It was a trap of light and shadow, designed to unmoor the mind. I was the night guard, the silent sentinel in this labyrinth of flesh and bone replicas, charged only with watching, wandering, and surviving. From the moment I stepped inside, the sculptures unsettled me. They were not mere statues. They were grotesque echoes of life, twisted and warped. Near the entrance sat the reader, a woman frozen with a book in her lap, her fingers digging deep into the pages like claws. Her skin was pallid and translucent, but beneath it, veins throbbed visibly, black and swollen, crawling with what looked like minuscule worms writhing just beneath the surface. Occasionally her eyes flickered, and her lips peeled back to reveal teeth sharpened to cruel points. Down the hall was the contorted man, seated on a cracked leather chair that seemed soaked in an unidentifiable dark fluid. His limbs twisted in impossible angles. His right arm bent backward at the elbow, fingers curled into a tight, unnatural claw that scraped the floor. His flesh was mottled, bruised with dark purple and green patches, and his face was stretched sideways, mouth stretched grotesquely into a silent scream, one eye bulging while the other was sunken deep into his skull. In the children's gallery, figures caught in a tableau of play were horrific parodies of innocence. Their skin bubbled and cracked, revealing raw, glistening muscle beneath. Fingers melted into each other, melding in grotesque fusion. One boy's leg ended abruptly in a mess of twisting sinew and bone, as if something had gnawed it away. Their eyes were empty, dull black orbs that seemed to suck light and hope. Then there was the twins. Two bodies fused at the spine. Their skin split wide down the middle, revealing glistening intestines intertwined like macabre rope. One twin's face was serene and beautiful, the other a grotesque mask of decay and pain, maggots crawling in the hollow eye sockets. They breathed slowly, wet sounds echoing faintly in the silent gallery. The silent dinner exhibit was worse. 4 figures sat at a table, their flesh peeling and crawling as if alive. Their veins were thick, pulsating cords that pulsed visibly beneath translucent skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Their mouths opened wide and snapped shut with sharp clicking sounds, revealing rows of uneven, jagged teeth, slick with saliva. From time to time, one figure would convulse violently, tearing at their own flesh as if trying to escape their porcelain cage. In the mirror room, dozens of figures stared out from endless reflections, except the reflections were wrong. Limbs bent at impossible angles, faces smeared and dripping like melting wax, eyes that stared but never truly saw. Sometimes my reflection would lag, twisting into a twisted grin far too wide and too sharp. One exhibit, the puppeteer, was a man suspended by dozens of thin, translucent threads that burrowed into his skin like veins, wrapping tight around his limbs and torso, lifting him an inch above the ground. His flesh was cracked rather than peeling, eyes rolled back, mouth stitched shut with thick black thread. The strings seemed to twitch, pulling him in jerky, unnatural movements. The building itself felt alive. Walls breathed in slow, rhythmic pulses. Floors flexed underfoot, like skin. Sometimes I could swear I felt a heartbeat beneath the marble. On the 5th night, the storm came. Lightning tore the sky open. Thunder shook the glass ceilings. Then the power died. Emergency lights flickered dimly, and the sculptures were not where I left them. The reader stood, her head bent sharply to one side, eyes wide and black, veins throbbing violently beneath her skin. Her fingers clawed at the book, tearing pages that floated away like ash. The contorted man was on his feet, limbs twisting further, skin rupturing to reveal twitching muscle and bone splinters. His mouth opened, releasing a silent, gaping scream that seemed to suck the light from the room. The children's mutilated forms crept closer, joints cracking with wet pops. One dragged its broken leg, a blackened stump, leaving thick, sticky footprints. The twins writhed, their fused intestines pulsing as if alive, faces melting into each other's in a grotesque dance. At the silent dinner table, the figures rose, jerking spasmodically, their hands tearing at their own faces, skin peeling away in flaking sheets. The puppeteer twitched violently, strings snapping and reattaching with unnatural precision, pulling him into a grotesque, suspended dance. I ran, the halls folded and warped, trapping me in endless looping corridors, mirrors fracturing my form into unrecognizable multiples. Finally, I found myself in the human replica gallery. Hundreds of statues filled the vast, echoing room, frozen screams etched on faces, veins pulsing with dark fluid, skin stretched tight and cracked like aged leather. One statue drew my breath away. It was me, but twisted. My skin was stretched and slit, black veins crawling beneath like living tattoos. My eyes were vacant pits, oozing dark ichor, mouth stretched wide in a frozen howl. I reached out. Cold stone met flesh. A heartbeat thrummed beneath my fingertips, a pulse no statue should have. Lightning flashed, illuminating 1,000 pairs of glassy eyes opening simultaneously. The room exhaled a wet, collective breath. Then the lights returned. I was outside, drenched in sweat, trembling. The footage was corrupted, except for one frame. A blurred silhouette stood motionless in the human replica gallery. The curator's voice was a whisper. They don't imitate life. They consume it. And once they've looked at you long enough, you become part of the exhibit forever. Weeks later, Drawn back by a force I couldn't resist, I returned. In the human replica gallery, a new statue had appeared. It was me, veins writhing beneath translucent flesh, eyes empty, yet alive, and lips curled slowly into a smile far too cruel to be human. You survived, for now, but the shadows aren't done with you yet. If this story gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who dares to watch and comment your thoughts, especially if you're watching in the dark. Subscribe to Spectral, Shadows, where fear never sleeps, and the next nightmare is always waiting. We'll be watching.